bridge has got kind of an interesting name, the type of bridge. It's called a trunnion bascule bridge. It's in French. Trunnion means pivot, bascule means seesaw. And these bridges do kind of work like a seesaw. They go up and down based on the actions of counterweights, heavy weights that are on either side of this bridge. We're going to probably be able to glimpse one of them later as we go past another one of these bridges. There's 18 of these bridges in the city limits of Chicago. Chicago is one of the first cities in the world that has this type of bridge. Now over on your left, you're going to be seeing in a minute a building with a kind of a curved front to it. And it looks like it's got a temple on the top of it. It is the London House, Chicago, 1923, Alfred Alshore. Now this is also an example of that Beaux-Arts architecture where you can see those columns, like the columns in ancient Rome underneath that temple. You see a lot of ornamentation on the building. It is Beaux-Arts, but it's also interesting because when it was opened, it was an office building. It was an insurance office building for the London Guarantee and Insurance Company, Maritime Insurance, and through the years it has been adapted. We call it a process of adaptive reuse to be things like a jazz club, to be things like now a beautiful hotel and restaurant venue. Now the building right beyond it on your left that looks like there's kind of a story. One thing, Stratosphere Lounge didn't open until 1937. Alcohol was completely legal. And Al Capone was cooling his heels in Alcatraz at that time. So it's an urban legend, sounds good, but not true. Now real quickly, I'm going to show you on the right, there is a black steel and glass building. Here, it's the AMA Plaza. We're going to see it again on the way back. But it is the office of Mies van der Rohe, 1971. Mies van der Rohe, famous mid-century modernist architecture. He believed that you should see the structure of the building, what's holding the building up should be exposed. Sometimes it's called skin and bones type architecture. We're going to see other examples of this as well. His famous phrase was, "Less is more." He didn't like all that ornamentation of historical, revivalist. Beaux-Arts didn't like that. He believed less is more. But now over here on your left, you're going to be seeing a building with white stripes in the front of it. Look like kind of white columns and a triangular top. The top is called like a pediment. It's glass with those white stripes and that pediment. This is the 1992 Ricardo Bofill building. This is an example of postmodernism. And in fact, we even call it the Parthenon on steroids because it's such an exaggeration. Postmodernists said, well, we don't like your less is more. We actually think less is a bore, and we want to have some more fun with our designs. Now, as we're going along here on your left, you'll see this walkway that goes along the river. It's called the River Walk. Some of you probably have been able to enjoy it. It's been a big boon to Chicago. It's a great amenity as the river has gotten much nicer to be near, much cleaner, much fresher. People can really enjoy restaurants, bars, and just walking along the river. Past the glass building, you'll see a brown building with kind of rows of windows that are kind of swooping up. The Sal Wacker building, 1930, Halliburton route. Now, this is an example of another type of architecture called Art Deco. Now, in Art Deco architecture, a lot of them were built in the 1920s, which was a very exuberant time, a lot of optimism. So the verticality, the fact that your eyes are kind of drawn up to the top, these rows of recessed windows, which was to have these tall buildings set back. Part of the building had to be set back from the other parts of the building to allow light and air to get down to the pedestrians. Also, people that were working in those buildings at the time were still era by the design of the building. Now, I will now be pointing out this building on your left. We're going to be going past a couple more buildings, and then on your left, if you look up, you'll see a building that looks like it has kind of a crazy looking dome on the top of it. There's actually 4 of these domes on each corner, and there's like a needle or a toothpick sticking out from the top of the domes. This is also an example of postmodernism. It's 225 West Wacker, Cohn, Peterson, and Fox. It was from 1989. Now, making sure we knew we were in Chicago. And those 4 domes on the top, on the corners, were supposed to be reminiscent of these bridges of the bridge. right underneath the top two, the two in the front here, you'll see a representation, kind of a sculpture of a bridge, right at the top of the building. If you look down from there, you'll see an urn shape. It's a little hard with the sun, I'm sorry, but it's down there, and that is very much like the designs of Frank Lloyd Wright. Frank Lloyd Wright, another famous Chicago architect. So they were textual to Chicago. Building right next to it, this beautiful green glass curved building, 333 West. It takes the color up from its windows from the river, and in fact, it's even reflecting its the built environment. We can see reflections of the buildings around the 333 West Wacker building in the front here. So it's very much trying to pick up cues and clues from its environment. So that's another characteristic of postmodernism. Any of you folks heard of the Ferris Bueller movies, Ferris Bueller, 2017. Now this building is actually a contemporary building, and contemporary architecture is usually said to be so in the 21st century. The contemporary architects use a lot of clean lines, and they work with interesting shapes, like this archway. And they could take advantage of structural engineering in a very narrow site. There's actually active train tracks underneath this building, and the columns that are holding up this building are actually tilted. But they figured out how to really have a foundation stable enough for a building like that by the 2000s. Now, on your left, we're coming now into the north branch of the river, and over on your left, you're going to be seeing a red brick, very rectilinear building. This is the oldest building we're going to be passing on the tour. It's from 1898. It's called Fulton House. Frank Abbott was the... And the river was kind of dirty and stinky. These people were pioneers, but they kind of got the last laugh because just about... noisy bridge here. Just about 10 years ago, one of those townhouses sold for $2.25 million in about 15 minutes. So now that the river has become so much more of an amenable place to be near, it's really changed. Front walkway with the public. So it's kind of they have beautiful views, of course, of the river, nice rooftop terraces and things along those lines. Now over on your right, we're going to be seeing one of the old. It was before that ordinance went into effect. So we can see here, that first floor, those folks on the first floor, they kind of have a residential building. This red brick building with the black iron balconies hanging off from it, that's usually a clue that a building has been... and this park is actually named after Montgomery Ward, Aaron Montgomery Ward Park. His own resources on lawsuits to keep the riverfront free of clear development and open to all. After him in honor of all the work that he had done. Now this building with like the white V's, kind of a blue building with like white V's that overlooks the park, that is Erie on the Park, Lucy and LaGrange. And it's kind of interesting because those white V's are actually they're structural. And that exoskeleton is really what is holding the building. He came to Chicago after the Civil War, and he'd been trained as a salesman. And when he came out here, he actually started to work the rural routes in the Midwest. Goods they could buy, they were stuck with a very narrow selection. They paid high prices. There was only usually one small store out there. So we got this new idea, a new type of business called a catalog business. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to have a list of items, a variety of goods, hopefully at a lower price. So he was quite the innovator. Now, this building on the right is now called 600 West. Schmidt Garden Martin, 1908 was when it was open. Now, this is interesting. In the morning, their job was to assemble the orders that were going to be sent out on the railroads. The building was so big, they came in the morning. What did they do? They strapped on roller skates. And that was the only way that they could get around this part of the industrial life of the city. Even though it's changing so much, with all of these buildings being transformed into residential buildings, etc., it still is a working river, and you still see that history of the river in how it's configured today, particularly in this North Branch area. Now, over here on your had its printing presses, its staff were here, lots of things had been going on, and it was open in the 80s, so it had been here for quite a while. Located. But there'll also be, in addition to the casino, right, Well, all of these businesses and activities generated a lot of garbage, a lot of debris, a lot of waste, right? The hogs were diseased. What? So the whole hog was thrown into the river. And then when you add that to the fact that there were really no sewage systems here that were particularly worked in any way, the people's waste also flowed into the river here. Wanted Chicago to be a world-class city, you know, to grow and to prosper. So they tried a bunch of things, nothing really worked. Finally, they turned to some brilliant engineers, one in particular from Boston, a guy named Ellis Chesborough, who was a sanitation engineer, and he had a very innovative idea, almost out of this world, but it was to reverse the flow of the Chicago River. So instead of flowing east towards Lake Michigan, the river was going to flow south and west to the Mississippi River Basin. Keep it away from the drinking water, right? And people kind of thought it was crazy, but they're really very, very deep. So this long, deep canal drew the water from the river down towards the Mississippi River Basin. It took them 8 years before the lawsuits actually stopped it, potentially. So activity has been going on to further clean the river. Stuck in filtration right position. This is the Kinsey Railroad Bridge. It's the oldest railroad bridge in Chicago. It's an example of that Trunnion Bascule Bridge, and if you sneak a look behind it, you might see that at some point, as the population is continuing to grow up here in the North Branch, they may need to open a railroad bridge here. It's cheaper to recycle a bridge than to build a whole new one. Stronger than average. We had to source that steel from Luxembourg. This arm of the Y might be able to see our boat there, kind of reflecting the windows, and might see yourself, take a picture if you like, or wave. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, not good.
The reason he said that was the taller the building is, the more you can essentially make money from it by citing office space or whatever else you need to do. The rate of the building allows a lot of space for rent out to offices, a lot of nice room for corner offices too, with the design that the architect used. Right beyond it, extremely beautiful Art Deco designs inside as well. Second largest opera in the country. Our Gateway Center 1 and 2. They are the mid-century modern buildings, and this particular kind of building, they say it can be built for any purpose. See the structure of the building, the outside, the steel structure holding it up, but it's unornamented, it's pretty kind of plain Jane. Now, next to the building, the next one is actually, but instead of the black buildings that were built in the 60s, this building was built in the 70s. It's Gateway Center 3. It's the Chicago home office for the Fifth Third Bank. Instead of black paint on metal, on steel, you have white paint on concrete. So the style is starting to change a little bit. It's becoming a little more ornamented, you might say. And next to this building is a very interesting side building, or bustle building as they call it, the black building with the X's on the front of it. This used to be a stock trading into a postmodernism style. Because this building is very contextual to its right, it's curved like the river. It picks up the color of the river in its windows. And the windows are very interesting. They have this kind of these pinched corners, if you look at them closely, and particularly in South Bank. And as we can see, as we look further down on the left, there's a black rectilinear building with the name The Reed in front of it. The beginnings of a beautiful park. We see people actually sitting here, walking their dogs, enjoying it. And they're going to continue to build this out and have even more of a river walk here. Somebody decided to kind of keep or kind of recycle some of the stones that were used to build that building. And as we get closer, 200 people died, which was a miraculously small number, actually, for fires of that type. But it was extremely devastating. It burned for a day and a half. Finally, rain started to fall, and it went out. And the railroads brought a lot of goods into the city to help rebuild it, but even more importantly, the railroads were bringing into the city very innovative, very creative, very amazingly hardworking people that wanted to rebuild the city and had great ideas about how to do it and how to actually bring innovation to architecture. If we think about it, in 1871, that time of the fire, a tall building was 5 stories high. 10 years later, 1881, and spires on the top of it, that black building with the white spires, that building is the Willis Tower, 1974, 103 years later or so from when the fire. And that building is 110 stories tall. Does use this technology as well, so it's very common now. I'll point out the building in front of the Willis Tower, that pink building, when they did, because we always will remember it. Kind of a cool thing. Now, and so for many years, the only thing on this side of the river were the railroad tracks, and they really couldn't build ways to sink the foundations for these super tall buildings under the railroad tracks, under and between the tracks. And then they were able to build these super talls on top of it. To it is a white tower that also has a clock on the top and the logo of the Boeing building. This is, in fact, the Boeing Company, I'm sorry. This is the Boeing building. This was the first use, building that park was the first use of airlines in Chicago. It was also the first public space that was utilized in front of a private building. So it kind of foreshadows the Riverwalk, which is kind of interesting. People back in those days, of course, didn't have Apple Watches. They didn't have smartphones. Now, right in front of us, there are, you can see these three steel They had pubs here, they had rooming houses, didn't have a lot of churches or schools, it was kind of a wild place. This area is very interesting as well, because up until about 10 years ago, there were really just ugly parking lots on this site. About 6 ugly parking lots. And then 10 years ago, these buildings started to come up and really transform this area so dramatically. Now on your left, we're going to be seeing this massive system that takes the water directly from the river, takes the river water, purifies it, diffuses it, and then it returns it to the river cleaner than it was when they took it out. So it's a way to keep the river getting cleaner and cleaner. Now, what I'm pointing out to you guys, on the right, if you look up, you hopefully will see, kind of shining in the sun, a gold tower, a slender gold tower, Hardon Brothers. And this building was designed and built during the Prohibition era, and it's said to resemble a champagne, right? With its gold cap and its green kind of glass like this. So when this complex was first built, there was a bowling alley, there was an ice skating rink, movie theater, lots of restaurants, and parking, so that you can have the building there. Now, any of you are old enough to remember, and so this building would have been designed to accommodate the cooling needs, security needs, all of that of those massive machines, and beautiful travel to the lobby of the building. Now, on your left, we're passing a curved silver building with these silver columns on it. The Trump name is on the building. That architect was involved in the tallest building in the world, helped design this building, and we can see again it's contextual to its environment. It's a postmodern, contemporary design, and it's that looked like a cathedral could have landed on its head. Now this is the Tribune Tower and Residences building, and it is of the historical revivalist style. And that cathedral is very reminiscent of the cathedral in Rouen, France. And you also see around that cathedral these arms that are kind of jutting out. These are called Burn Building. It almost looks like the roof of the building is kind of floating on those George Streeter. He kind of sailed up here into this area, but as we can remember, was really just